Hold this up.
Like that.
Let me see. I'll talk about the house.
Or about how you...
Kathleen says she's going to write a book. I tell her all these old experiences, and she's got her chapters outlined. Like that, just like this?
Well, let's see, it's here. This is the thing right here. So we just hold it like that. So.
And just speak anyway.
Yeah.
When I was a child, we lived in an old log house, which was at that time over 100 years old. It sat upon a hill, and at the base foot of this hill was a giant elm tree and a bubbling clear spring from which we got our water and had to carry it up the hill. Beyond, a little bit beyond, was a little clear sparkling river. More a rill, I suppose. It wasn't large. And the little waterfalls on the lower part of it. Those waterfalls were one of my most precious memories of my childhood. They were not large or gigantic sights to see, but just little miniature waterfalls, and the water was always gurgling and singing over them, and we played around that all the time. That was our favorite place to play, and bordered by cattails and shrubs. I remember one time in the month of February, and I was just a little girl, we're not supposed to wade or get out in water at that time of year, cold water, but Sister and I were playing around, and I couldn't resist getting out there to wade. It was ice cold, and I fell down on the slippery rocks, and sopping wet and afraid to go home to Mother to let her know I was sopping wet in this icy water. So I had to sit on a big rock and let the winter sun dry my clothing before I would return home. Our house was just sealed with logs and mud in between. In those days, all the houses were fixed like that. Mud was placed between the logs like a plaster nowadays.
Was this in DeSoto, Missouri?
No. This was out in the country. Our nearest town was 4 miles away, and it was just a wide place in the road. Just a wide place in the road with a church and a general store. The name of the town was Fertile. Fertile.
Is it up near DeSoto in that area?
Yes, it's in that area.
Was that house you visited that time?
Yeah, I think so.
Was that the house where you used to fix mattresses and stuff with leaves?
Yes. Well, I will. In those days, we had no money. My father had no regular occupation, a profession, I should say, so we just got our living as best we could. But Mother was a wonderful worker and a good cook, and even though we had nothing in material needs, we didn't ever have plenty of groceries. We just ate from hand to mouth. But yet my recollection of my childhood is not of a bitter, or I don't feel this lack of material things was detrimental whatsoever. I had things in my life which modern kids don't have and never will have, of the true things of nature which makes life. My mother knew all the herbs, any herb in the fields, and she made our medicines out of these herbs. I remember the standard cough medicine was to strip the bark off a wild cherry tree and steep it on the back of the stove till a strong tea was brewed, add sugar, or if we didn't have sugar, we put sorghum molasses in it, made a thick syrup, and that was the cough medicine. And we never had a doctor. Mother had 9 children, but I do not remember but once in my life a doctor in the house.
Where was the doctor?
And the doctor was miles away. Mm-hmm. I was bit by a copperhead snake when I was 10 years old, but we didn't have a doctor. We had no money. Father was away working, and Mother was there alone, and there was no transportation and any way to go after a doctor. But after the 3rd day, she thought my leg would have to be removed. she did finally have the boy, 14-year-old boy, walk 3 miles to the nearest doctor, and the doctor did have a buggy and horse and drove back to see me, but he told her he could do nothing. The poison venom was in my system. So I pulled through that, but all that winter I didn't go to school, and it was a long time getting over the effects of this.
Well, tell me, didn't you say that Grandma Barton used to use egg whites when there was a cut or something?
Yes, and one of the remedies in those days, if a child sustained a cut, was bleeding severely, or anything, well, nowadays we would use Band-Aids and things. She broke an egg and took that white membrane against the shell and spread it over that, and it healed it in time. It protected it, and it did probably as well as the medical means nowadays. One time my little brother next to me, Brother Paul, was running up and down the porch, and he fell against an old tool chest on the porch and spread his nose wide open. We didn't get the doctor then. Well, there's no way to get one. So she put egg whites over that. And, of course, his nose was just a little bump on it later on. It's summertime in this old house. There was a porch around it, a rude porch. And you want me to keep on that?
No.
Gigantic stones, native stones, were our steps. But in the summer, when my father would be gone, so my kids and I, mother and I, all sat on this porch. But whippoorwills were in the summertime, would come up on the porch if we were quiet enough and did not make any disturbance or sat quiet as ghosts. We would do that to get the whippoorwills to come up on the porch and sing, and we'd listen quietly for a long period of time while they came cautiously up there. On our very porch, there was a gigantic fireplace in the supposedly living room, and we had our wood. Our fuel was not coal. We had no means to get coal, and wasn't heard of in those days around there. Just the boys had to go out in the woods and cut down and bring in this on rude homemade sleds that brought the wood in for the fireplace. Yes. In the kitchen was a good old-fashioned, there's a big fireplace in the kitchen also. This old quaint house, it was French-built, of some French manner, was a gigantic fireplace in the living room and in the kitchen, and those two went together about they were back to back, used the same chimney for about halfway up. And my fondest recollection is on winter evenings, my older brother, we had about one good book that he liked, and he would sit there, the oldest one in the family, and read out of this book. We kids and even Mother would all be sitting around in a circle. He would read that book through out loud to us. Emmett. And we did have popcorn usually. And Mother cooked a great deal on this fireplace. And I remember coming home from school, and there was a crane on the side of the fireplace. She would have pots simmering on there, our supper. But we had none of the luxuries of life, but we knew all about nature. Mother knew every tree and every herb, and she was a natural lover of beauty. And she noted the coming of the seasons, the clouds in the sky. All this was of immense importance. And in the spring of the year, my brother Paul would go out and get the first spring flowers and bring them as a bouquet to Mother, just like a rich kid would have real luxuries or something fancy. And they rejoiced and took as much pleasure in those simple things. And she taught me to love beauty around you. And in the country like that, there is natural beauty, far better than any old colored TV and wall-to-wall carpeting and junk people consider wonderful now. It's nothing to natural beauty of nature. In this place where we lived. There was a country graveyard. In those times, way out in the country, people had a burying ground, family burying ground. And my brother used to, and big apple trees were out near that. And I remember one time my brother Stan, he was up in the apple tree eating green apples, and he fancied that he saw something white rising up out of one of the graves. He fell out of the tree and came home frightened to death. He was frightened to death. He would never go in their graveyard alone anymore. When I was a child, the traveling salesman.
Was your father a traveling salesman?
No. Oh, he did carpenter work, and later on he tried to be a doctor. But anyhow, these traveling salesmen would come up this country road going over to the country store to place in a stock. And they were, the epitome of luxury, and we thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world, to be a traveling salesman. They dressed well, and they saw these little kids along the roadside, and they always threw out cigar boxes to us, empty cigar boxes or anything like that, and packages of chewing gum, which was a height of luxury. But us children, there were so many of us, one package of gum was not enough for everybody to have a stick of gum. So we would divide the sticks of gum. I'd take turns about in chewing this gum. And a sister would chew it a while, and I would stand by drooling while she chewed this delicious gum. Then it'd be her turn, and she would chew it. And that's what we did. Now, of course, people say nowadays, oh, how terribly unsanitary. But we were never sick. We were never sick. We didn't know the meaning of the word shot. Nobody was ever sick, even though we chewed after each other. The father had an old cow named Buttercup. And this cow was so tame, when he would milk it, it would lick, with his great long tongue, it would lick him. And it just petted it to death and thought it was fine. And our watchdog was named Old Watch. And he had a big yellow shepherd. And he would lie on the porch at night and had a booming voice. And anything came in that valley, you could hear him barking a mile away. He guarded our house so well and was a part of the family.
Your father's first name was
Francis Marion. Barton.
So where was he born, do you think?
Walpole Centerville, that's where he's born.
Where do you think Barton came from?
Kentucky.
And the early?
Scotland.
Yeah, originally, but from this country, where did Grandma's parents live? Grandma Barton?
Up there by Bonterra, towards St. Genevieve. My grandfather, on my mother's side of the family, was a gristmill operator, and he ran a big old country mill. They ground flour and corn for the neighbors that came in. His pay was a certain percentage amount of whatever he ground. They would pay him by giving him a sack of flour or a meal. That was his pay. There was a great, immense stone water wheel powered by this little stream. Not the stream which I lived at when I was a child. That was when my mother was a child. It powered this mill. And his name was, they were Turleys, and they came from Scotland. Tall, blonde people, they all were. When my mother was only 12 years old, her mother died at the age of 38 and left a family of 8 children. And she put on a long dress and took charge of that family, quit school, and devoted her life to raising those children until she met my father, and he persuaded her to get married. 22, 21 or 22, I believe. And she had the entire care, and with no modern aids or any help, nothing whatsoever, only hard labor and strong back, to raise those 8 children. Then, when she met my father, she married, but her father, my grandfather, begged her not to marry and leave him, so he would have to have someone take care of the children. So he married and put a stepmother over the children. And it always sort of worried Mother that she didn't stay with him and take care of her sisters and brothers. But Mother stepped from the frying pan into the fire. She left the brood of 8 sisters and brothers and had 9 children of her own and no provision. But she was always able to cope. I never remember her being tantrumy and full of winds and cranky and mean. I never remember her ever having a temper tirade. Always calm and able to do the best with what she had. Many times I'm sure it was heartbreaking because she did not have the food to feed her family. Adequate food. I remember many times when I was going to bed at night with just a little corn cake was all Mother had in the house. She'd cook that and divide it into wedges. We'd each have a piece of that. That was what we went to sleep on. But we were always healthy. So I don't feel that deprivation was destructive to me or to any of the rest of us. Everybody's done all right, even though we didn't have luxuries or were not pampered. Everyone's done all right. It hasn't had any detrimental effect upon my temperament whatsoever. And all this stuff now about things that happen to kids when they're little, I don't believe in it. I believe what you are, and what's in you by heredity. That's what I think. And I think a little hardship and deprivation is good for children. How can they appreciate anything if they've never known anything else? How can you appreciate something if you've never known want? To have true appreciation of beauty and everything, you've had known deprivation. Otherwise, you cannot truly appreciate it. That is my opinion, which I don't say has to be right, but it is mine.
I want to turn the alternate, let grandmother collect her thoughts for that.
Let me what? Drying my hair. I guess like one of these, what mermaids or what. I had washed my hair and it was long, it was waist length. It was blowing all about me. I was drying my hair and he just sauntered along very slowly, kept looking in. But that's the first time I ever saw him, first time he ever saw me. Men were so much more romantic in those days than they are now.
Very different culture, really.
My husband's pet name for me when we were courting was Little Dove, or Little Doll. That I was called it. But I was little, only weighed 98 pounds. But none of this rough stuff. And I remember one of Liney's boyfriends called her Goonchild.
Was he engineer when he got there?
No, he's just a young man. They have to be years. It takes years to make a locomotive engineer. You can't do that overnight. It takes years of training. I think that's an honorable, manly calling to be a locomotive engineer. And I used to ask him if his nerves be having all those cars behind him, people's lives depending upon exact timing. See, he had to have exact time. That's his watch up there. I saved it. I've never sold it. I could have sold it and gotten. You know, it's a railroad watch is always a good watch and something real good. But that was just everything to him. He wound it a certain time each day. No matter how sleepy he was, he always roused and reached under his pillow and got his watch and wound it. Everybody wants that watch. It should go to somebody by the name of McRill, but I offered it to Paul one time. Right after Charlie died, he said his method of life, it's not a wristwatch, you know.
Yeah.
He would have no way to take care of it. He wouldn't wear it because men didn't use that kind of watch, and he didn't want it.
What was that house you lived in? The one burned down?
Oh, that's the house on the farm that burned down, where we drive by,
Where?
out in the country, out by,
The golf course?
out in the country.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
It was pretty often,
Well, I don't know where she taught. When I was a child, we had to go to a country school, which was 3 miles away, so I didn't get to go to school till I was 7. Mother thought it was too far for me to walk at that young age. But when I was 7, we went to this country school, and the teacher taught all 8 grades. And I remember coming in on cold winter mornings, so miserable from being so cold that we'd be sniveling and whining. And there was 2 other little girls from in that vicinity walked too, and we were the smallest kids. And there was a gigantic big stove, wood stove in the schoolroom, and there's benches by it so the kids would go up there and get warm. She would make the ones that were sitting on those benches get up when the little children, crying girls, came in, and let us sit there to get warm. And every Friday we would have ciphering matches and spelling matches. It's just with numbers like the words are. And the goal of everybody was to be the head one. When you missed a word, you went down one. And at the end of the game hour, they had every Friday, the one that's at the head was, got a good mark. But we, in those country schools, were taught spelling, writing, and the fundamental things. I'm amazed quite often now at some of that fundamental teaching that modern children don't seem to have it. They can't write some of them at all. Our writing was important. But I remember that a boy sat behind me who continued to dip my braids in the inkwell. In those times, there was old-fashioned desks. We had our books in our desk at the school. And there's a little receptacle on the desk which was kept full of ink. And you could raise that little lid and dip your pen in it. But he amused himself. I had long braids down to my waist. He dipped my pigtails in this ink. That's one of my recollections. But the teacher, would bring her lunch, and she had a good lunch, usually apple or cookie or something that was luxury to us. We did not have it. We had beans, cornbread, cold potatoes, or cold turnips, or something of that nature. That was what we had, and we were pleased to get that, and we carried our lunches in little small half-a-gallon tin pails to school. But the teacher, oh yes, and so kind. One of my best recollections is one of our teachers was called Miss Clara Clancy. And she boarded in that neighborhood, but she didn't live in the town, but she boarded out there one of the country places. And she would have what we call luxurious lunch. She'd be eating that, and us little girls would stand around and, how kids are, and watch this teacher slicing this luscious red apple or nibbling these fancy cookies. But she was so sweet and kind. She always divided with us little girls. Always divided with us. Always give her some of her lunch. She was so kind and so good.
The teacher usually stayed for quite a while.
Yes, yes. And I remember at Christmas the teacher always put on a program, and the parents in the neighborhood would come to see it, And we'd practice for days upon this program. And I remember as well as if it were an hour ago, when I was 7 years old, the Christmas program, there was a song. I could even sing a verse of it now if my voice were clear enough to sing. I remember the words. And there's a few little girls, all of them kindergarten girls. We didn't have kindergarten, but it would be the equal kindergarten ages. And we had supposed to have a big doll and rock it back and forth in our arms and sing, "We're all waiting for Santa Claus to come." And there's a great deal more to it, And we dressed in little gowns, and they had these big dolls in our arms. But I had no big doll. And let's see now, we borrowed one somehow or other from someone who was more prosperous. The teacher got hold of a doll for me so I could hold a doll. And we sang that song. There was always plenty of cedar Christmas trees. We had a nice tree And at that tender age, I had, I guess you'd call a boyfriend. My first boy that ever noticed me had a little sack, looked like a little 10-cent sack of store candy on the brown sack on the tree for me. And I was only 7 years old. And I remember his name even was Josie Osher. But we sang that little song, and she always had a nice program. Oh, the teachers worked so hard on us. 8th grades, imagine it. 8th grade, you had 8 reading classes come up. It didn't go beyond the 8th grade, though.
Then if kids went to high school, where did they have?
No high school was heard of in those days. It wasn't heard of. You'd have to go to big cities to get any form of advanced education. But if they got through the 8th grade, it was considered a miracle. This old house we lived in was a gigantic house. This old house, is it on or off?
Put it a little bit more.
What?
Put it a little bit more. It stops and stops. Go ahead.
Was an old and a large house consisting of 2 enormous rooms, log rooms, and this gigantic fireplace in the end of each one. It wasn't a little mini more fireplace. It was covered almost half of the wall, made of native rock, not brick, native rock from the place. And one Christmas, my mother, after Christmas over, she attempted to burn the Christmas tree rather than carrying it out, getting it out into the snow. So she threw it over into the fireplace, thought it would burn rapidly. It burned so rapidly that it almost set the house on fire. And to this day, those scorches are still, as the wooden mantle, on that mantle, just like it was yesterday.
How did you decorate your tree?
Mother was innately artistic and able to make and wanted to make and do the best she could with what was available. And all year long, she saved what little scrap of tin foil we would get. Is like a tin foil, like you buy foil in rolls now. In those days, now don't try any of that. Take it outside if you're going to play. What?
Go ahead.
All year long, Mother would save. You know, we had pink wrapping papers. That was considered something beautiful. They would wrap a package or, in pink wrapping paper or maybe a pink sack. And she saved these meticulously, as much as we would a $100 thing now, and saved the little pieces of tin foil, which are metal foil, what we call foil now. None of that was destroyed. It was regarded as, just wonderful. We saved it all the whole year through. And weeks before Christmas, she would start cutting out little stars and things using a piece of pasteboard for her pattern. And she says, Hello, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It was draped around the Christmas tree, and these little stars, testing, the sparkling foil. That was our decorations. We thought it was wonderful. But she made as much effort to have Christmas as anyone could possibly have done, and had the spirit of Christmas, and did the best she could to make it festive and beautiful for us. And we thought that was wonderful, those long strings of white popcorn and the little foil stars and things.
I guess you cut down your own tree in those days.
Those woods, our woods were full of cedar trees, dark, beautiful cedar trees. And on rainy days, my older sister, and I would go out and